All right, Stephanie, we're going to call to order and we're going to do some of the easy stuff.
Okay.
Without our executive director, see what we can do.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So,
Let me come closer. Everyone's microphones are...
We're going to get the easy stuff done without our executive director.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. All right, I'm going to call... wait, never mind, hold on. I just pulled up the executive committee meeting. Here we go, board of directors. Wrong meeting. Sorry. Give me a second.
You need a paper agenda?
Please join Bonacorsi in the Pledge of Allegiance. Get that out of the way. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That was one of the slowest ones I've been involved in. Okay, give me a paper agenda, please. I just need a paper one. All right, I'm going to call the East Bay Community Energy to order. Roll call, please.
Albany. Berkeley.
Got it.
Dublin.
Present.
Emeryville will be 10 minutes late. Fremont.
Here.
Hayward.
I better be here.
Livermore is excused. Oakland. Piedmont.
Here.
San Leandro.
Present.
Union City. Community Advisory Committee.
Here.
You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Public comment, time in which you can speak to anything that's not on today's agenda. Al?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
President Hegarty. For people who don't know who I am, I'm Al Weinrub. I'm the coordinator of the Local Clean Energy Alliance, and the item that I'd like to address just briefly that's not on the agenda is an item that was raised at the Executive Committee meeting last month, which has to do with a question of legislative policy. AB 813 is a bill in the legislature, which basically cedes control over the California Independent System Operator to a Western Regional Authority. And what I mean by the California Independent System Operator, if people are not familiar, this is the agency that balances supply and demand in the state and sets a whole number of policies around transmission lines in particular. And it is currently now the board of that authority is chosen by the state of California. With this bill, the board, that authority would become part of a Western Regional Authority. 11 states which are heavily dominated by coal interests, by transmission interests, by big centralized energy interests. And that would then start to shape the policies in California. So all the progress that we've seen in California around renewable energy over the last 2 decades are the result of the fact that California has been able to have an independent system operator. That was a fight that was fought a number of years ago, and this bill would essentially reverse that fight. It's extremely important for community choice beyond anything else, because community choice programs are all premised on our ability to control and make decisions, policy decisions about our energy future. And you know, when the California Public Utilities Commission comes in and tries to interfere, we get upset about that. And when the California Independent System Operator does the same thing, we are actually opposed to that too. Like, we know that now, for example, we pay transmission costs, and we will continue to do that unless the policy changes, which will really undermine our ability to have local renewables, because we would not get the benefit of avoided transmission costs. So if we don't want to cede our power and our control to the CPUC or to CAISO or to other instruments of the state, why would we cede those interests to a regional authority that is dominated by coal interests and big transmission interests and big centralized interests. It's all about the centralized big control of energy and energy market in the western regional states. And 5 of the states that are part of this 11-state consortium are those states that have sued the EPA, around the question of the Clean Power Plan. So this is totally antagonistic to the interests of California as a state, but in particular to community choice programs. We are focusing on distributed energy resources. This is anathema to those interests that would then control the market. So I want to make a strong pitch for the board at the appropriate time to strongly oppose this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Appreciate it. As you know, it's public comment, so we can't respond to you. So. All right. If there's no problems with the consent calendar, I would ask for a motion.
So moved.
Can I have a motion? Is there a second? Second by Pilch. Is there an objection to the motion? Motion will pass without objection. Looking for an approval of the minutes of April 18th.
So I'll move approval, but I did submit a couple of minor typo type changes to Stephanie earlier this week, so I move approval with those minor changes.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments on the minutes?
What were those? Were they just minor clarifications?
They weren't even. Give me a second. They were really minor, as I recall. On page 4. Yeah, just like missing commas and the wrong tense and the wrong word misspelled, things like that. Just little tiny things.
I'll second.
They weren't even significant.
Motion and a second. Is there any objection to the motion? Motion passed without objection. Item 9, the election of chair and vice chair.
So I would move that we continue with the chair and the current chair and vice chair. So that would be Supervisor Haggerty for chair and Councilmember Cald for vice chair for another year.
Okay.
I'd second that.
Where's the second?
So we're doing this by motion rather than by nomination?
Well, you can make another nomination if you'd like.
I'll nominate Al as vice chair.
Second.
Who seconded that? You guys are really going to make life difficult, aren't you? Okay. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Then I'm going to ask for a motion to close the chair, because that's kind of self-serving.
Yes, so moved, since there's just one nominee there.
Right. Is there any objection to that? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, on the vice chair, I've actually never had this happen before, so procedurally, I don't want to screw this up. Al, I'll look to you as our parliamentarian. How do we do this? Where's our attorney? She's not here. Do we vote on the first one and then the second one, or the first one?
Yeah.
Correct.
Second motion.
Second motion votes on first.
I'm sorry, y'all talked at once, so.
Sorry about that. The second nomination gets voted on first. And if I could just say that my only concern is that the representation from Oakland has been spotty, and that's my biggest concern for not continuing Oakland as the vice chair.
So if I could, in Al's defense, or not in Al's defense, in Dan's defense, as we all know, he's been running for assembly, and we're going to know either way next month, right? And I'm not saying Al's not qualified. That's not what I'm saying. It's just I don't know that Dan has missed a meeting. I think he's been late to a lot of them.
I believe he has. I believe he has missed meetings.
Okay. Well, I'm not speaking for either one. I'm just saying. What to do? Okay. So you said vote on the second one first. Is that what you said? Is that what somebody said? Okay.
So the second one was Al.
The second one, no, is Al Mendel. Okay. I guess it's a roll call vote. Chair goes last.
Albany,
Yes.
Berkeley,
No.
thank you. Dublin,
No.
Emeryville,
Abstain.
Fremont.
Yes.
Do I call Hayward? Hayward?
Well, I'm going to abstain.
Piedmont,
Abstain. Okay, you're not going to get enough votes.
San Leandro,
No.
It's not that we
Union
don't love
City?
you, Al.
Yes.
So the outcome of the vote aside, I appreciate the compliment.
3. Just a moment.
I don't think I voted, but I don't think it matters. I don't think you guys.
We have 3 for each option.
Yeah, but you didn't ask me.
Oh, that's correct. I
It's
didn't.
not going to change the outcome.
Okay. Are you abstaining as well? Or no?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, even if I vote aye, he doesn't have enough.
Okay. So the motion failed.
So I'll vote aye. I keep Al on my good side. Okay, so now I'll call for a motion on Dan Cobb.
Okay. So now for Vice Chair Kolb, Albany,
Abstain.
Oh my God.
Berkeley,
Yes.
Dublin,
Yes.
Emeryville,
Yes.
Fremont,
Yes.
Hayward,
Yes.
Piedmont,
Yes.
San Leandro,
Yes.
Union City.
Yes.
Motion passed.
All right, so our executive director is no longer with us because he can't show up to meetings on time. Oh, no. Oh, he showed up. Okay, I guess we'll keep him then, okay? All right, so then that is Dan Cobb as the vice chair. I would say that is an excellent choice for next time around. Okay, yeah, it's a good choice for next time around. Mr. CEO, you're just in time for your report.
So, the report
Is to turn on your mic.
2 items that I wanted to...
Turn on your mic. Do you want me to do something?
Here we go. Sorry. 2 items on the report. One is a quick, really one is an update on opt-outs, just to give you a sense of where our stats for opt-outs are. So as of May 9th, when we pulled the opt-out numbers, we had 0.24% of our commercial accounts had opted out, representing 0.5% of load. So those are good stats. Our opt-outs are so low right now that we actually can't break them out by city because of there's a rule, it's called the 15-15 rule, that if you have fewer than 15 accounts, you can't share the information publicly because you could potentially calculate, figure out who that customer is. So that's positive. I think generally speaking, the experience with opt-outs has been it's a camelback. So there's an initial sort of bump in opt-outs when the first mailers go out, and then when the 4th mailer goes out. So once someone gets their bill for June and July, that's when the second hump of opt-outs tends to be, because someone's looking at their bill like, what is this East Bay Community Energy thing? So fairly pleased that our opt-outs were modest during the first sort of camel hump of opt-outs, and we'll continue to monitor it closely. Obviously, the one sort of interesting point is the percentage of load that's opted out is twice as much as the number of accounts, and that's because a couple large accounts have opted out. The second item on the CEO report is the updated schedule for the local development business plan. So our consultants have been working diligently. There's a lot of subject matter out there to cover, and they just have needed some more time. So in talking with them, they needed about an extra 2 weeks. And so I actually having a call with them tomorrow to check in on the status, and our hope is that they will have the draft report ready Monday. It will be issued publicly. We'll send it out to our service list, and we're working to schedule a set of public meetings. We had one initially scheduled actually next Monday, but because the report won't have come out until Monday, we are looking to push that back into either the last week of May or into June. This delay, though, also is going to mean we're going to have to wait to bring this item to the board until July so that there's really adequate opportunity for everyone to review the document, provide comment, and then also for us to be able to take some of that comment back and make some adjustments based on the feedback. So that is that. CEO report.
Any questions of our executive director? Okay, move to the CAC appointment recommendations, item 11.
So the CAC appointment recommendations, we have 3 recommended appointments. Our folks here, Rick, Mary, and Jane. If you want to stand up and say hello. So Rick, Mary, and Jane we're very happy to have you here. And Rick, Mary, and Jane were selected out of a pool of 17 applicants, 7 of whom were interviewed by an ad hoc committee of Chair Haggerty and Director Martinez and Director Mendel. And so these are the 3 recommended candidates for appointment to the CAC. There will be a follow-on set of recommendations for alternates, but because we actually haven't amended the JPA formally to allow for alternates to be appointed, we can't appoint an alternate without the JPA being modified to reflect that alternates can be appointed. So our hope is either at the June or July meeting that we'll be able to bring alternates forward for appointment from that same pool of applicants.
Questions? Comments? Motion?
Move for acceptance.
Wait, I think on a course he made a motion on that. Is that a motion?
I just had a question, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, why are we just down to 1 representative from Fremont? We did have an application. Was there ever an attempt to replace a Fremont representative with another Fremont representative?
Believe me, with me being on there, there was definitely an attempt, but...
Fair enough.
So there was an applicant from Fremont.
Right. Okay. When are the next vacancies open? Are they all, when's the next round?
The terms are 2-year terms. Anna Olivia, why don't you?
So we are on a little bit of a rotating schedule. So the first group of people's terms will be up in 1 year, but the real next opportunity is in June or July, where the 3 alternates will be brought forth, and there's also been some really positive staff response from requests from the Community Advisory Committee around participation requirements. So we'll see how those things develop, but really the next opportunity is June or July for the alternates.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so with that, I have a motion by Director Bonacci.
Second.
Second by Mendel. Is there any objection to the motion? Congratulations, you are now members of our CAC.
Welcome.
Okay, we'll now move to item 12, which is our fiscal year 2018-19 budget.
Yes. So this budget was initially presented at the executive committee meeting at the end of April. And it has been very modestly adjusted. So I'm going to actually move to the PowerPoint presentation just to kind of walk through all the key points. So can we post that, please? Thank you. Okay. Okay, so I don't know. We're all waiting to post it. I'll just sort of start it. So the highline details are expected revenues of $318 million. Those are all from the sales of electricity, with energy expenditures of $241 million. This presentation goes in fairly good detail around sort of each of the key line items in the budget, but if you have any questions ahead of jumping in, please do ask them. Otherwise, I'm going to start working through it. So one thing that we did do was we did benchmark our budget to that of other CCAs, just to give a frame of reference sort of for particularly our things like staffing costs, consulting costs, marketing and outreach costs. I think the two things that are really worth noting here are, on the one hand, our personnel costs are roughly 33% lower than the average sort of comparable set, yet our professional services costs are 19% higher. So that's sort of to be expected. We're still staffing up. We're more reliant on consultants and outside vendors than we are, but over time, I expect that to switch, and for us to have particularly for the next budget, our personnel costs be much more in line with other CCAs. The other thing worth noting here is our G&A is a little bit higher. A lot of that has to do with in our comparable setting, we include Monterey and Sonoma. Their costs for things like rent are significantly lower than ours are, and so that's one of the reasons why our G&A is relatively higher than the comparable set. And then finally, our programs expenses are lower here, considerably lower than other CCAs. A lot of that is a function of we're starting out, so we're not expecting day one to be pushing program money out the door, and so our expectation is to ramp that up. The recommendation in here for program expenditure was developed in coordination with the local development business plan consulting team, just to say what is a number we can put in there somewhat as a placeholder that we think is sufficient to get started, but is not so big that we're not going to be able to manage to it.
Nick, just a quick question on the previous page. So all the electricity sales is that all non-residential sales, or does that include a little bit of residential sale as well?
Yeah. So let's go to the overview of revenues slide right here. So this includes all customers, but it includes a phase-in. So a full operational year revenues we'd expect them to be higher, but because we're phasing customers in November, and frankly we're phasing customers in June, so we don't actually recognize revenue for June until August, because there's a 2 months delay in payment. We effectively have 11 months of revenue for our commercial customers and 5 months of revenue for our residential customers, and that's what the $318 million represents. We do have a number of assumptions here, like opt-outs, uncollectibles, a percentage of customers that are in different rate classes. So next slide, please. One thing that I think is really important to note is just sort of the volatility that we're facing. So in March, PG&E increased their rates, and that, all other things being equal, would have meant an increase in revenue to East Bay Community Energy. But at the same time, we also saw considerable shift in the price of certain energy commodities that more than offset the revenue gain from the increased rates. So one of the reasons why at that time, when the rate sheets were being discussed, there was no recommendation to increase or change the discount, is that we felt like there's enough volatility. I think what I would say over the last 2 weeks, we've been really deep in energy procurement. We're continuing to see a lot of volatility. So next slide, please. Overview of expenditures. So this is our cost of energy. This is, 95% of our expenses are the cost of buying energy. And, there are 4 real sort of major types of costs. There are block shape energy, renewable energy, carbon-free energy, and then resource adequacy, which is a product that's more about the reliability of the grid. Then there's a fairly modest, relatively modest cost for scheduling and data and billing and data management. That's for for data management, billing, and call center. So that's the cost of SMUD. That's on a per meter per month. So we're paying $1.05 per meter per month to SMUD to manage all of our back office. And then finally, there are service fees that we have to pay to PG&E, mostly related to billing. Okay, next slide, please. So the next slide is debt service. So there are two types of debt that we have outstanding. One is to the county, the other is to Barclays. So in our budget, we are planning to fully pay back the county sometime between the second and third quarter of the fiscal year. So that is, from October, November, December, January, February, March. And that time frame is when we're budgeting to pay the county, fully pay the county back. And then the Barclays debt service is based on sort of a monthly repayment to Barclays on a 30-month amortization. And this is a somewhat conservative estimate because while we have a facility of $50 million, it's possible, depending on what the credit requirements for buying large-scale renewable energy products are, we may have to post collateral. And we may need to use this facility to post that collateral to sign a PPA for 100 megawatts or 200 megawatts of wind or solar. So we sort of took a conservative approach here, assuming we may have to do that, and that's why our total outstanding debt, and then as a result, our debt service to Barclays is fairly high here. So then the next item is personnel. This is one of the items that did change modestly from the presentation at the executive committee. We did add 2 additional positions after some further staff discussion. Our recommendation here, or our proposal, is to add 21 staff over the course of the fiscal year in a wide variety of roles, from 3 customer service roles really focused on the call center transition to a data scientist really focused on analyzing customer usage data and thinking about how do we design customer programs. The next slide is an overview of an org chart, and you see there's a lot of positions here, and there's a lot of and in the org chart you see there's also sort of when, generally speaking, we plan to hire people. So Q1 is Q1 of the fiscal year, not of the calendar year. So next slide. We also have a proposed set of salaries, a salary range for these open positions. We did conduct a salary survey of other CCAs. So we had 5 CCAs that we pulled data from to develop this range. At the executive committee meeting, the request was made for the customer service reps to benchmark our proposed range to that of what PG&E pays its CSRs. So we did pull the 2017 to 2019 contract for clerical. That's so we include that here as the comp. So a standard service rep at PG&E would make 62,000 2017 and up to 66,000 2019. Our reps, the range is between 65 and 102. For a senior rep, the high end of their range in 19 is 93,000. So it's hard to compare it on a totally apples to apples basis because of benefits. So we don't have a pension. PG&E has a pension. We do have medical. We have a generous medical plan. So really the best way to compare was purely on salary. And so as you see, the salary range that we're offering our reps is a little bit higher than what's in the PG&E contract. I also note, while many reps for PG&E work outside of the Bay Area, they do have a call center in San Jose, so these salaries, I believe, are applicable to the reps in San Jose, so that's a similar job market.
Nick, so just curious, you don't have a pension plan? Do you have a 401k plan yet?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And do you expect to continue the 401k plan in lieu of a pension plan?
We're evaluating our options right now. Participating in CalPERS, joining CalPERS is very expensive, so we're trying to evaluate what the costs are. Also, there's ongoing liability, so there's some uncertainty around as a JPA if there are some unique considerations that we would have to make. So for the time being, 401k plan is what we have.
So have you looked at the county's program? As you know, the county's a 37 Act program, and they're not CalPERS.
Yeah, we will. That's a great recommendation. We have not, frankly, we set up our 401A just as sort of as a placeholder, but absolutely we'll work with the county as well to evaluate.
I think you should actually talk to us, Sarah.
Okay.
I mean,
we will.
It's a pretty good program.
Okay. Yeah, we will absolutely do that.
Better shape than CalPERS.
Next slide, marketing and outreach, please. So this is our budget for marketing, outreach, communications, and customer service activities. The lion's share of these costs related to launch related, and the single biggest line item here is mailing for phase 2. So we're going to put out almost 2 million mailers this fall, so the vast majority of these costs relate to those 2 million mailers, but also certainly lots of ongoing marketing activities, community outreach, attending events, sponsoring events, working with community groups to sponsor them, joining chambers of commerce. All of that fits into this budget line item.
Will you be at the county fair?
I believe we are working on solidifying our booth at this county fair. So my expectation is the answer is yes, but I don't know if we're working on it. We're working on it, yes.
Are you having problems? Because the look on your face was not really convincing. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to know.
The look is simply because we're still actually planning out for our phase 2 outreach. So the county fair is coming up in June. We don't launch for residential until November. So we can certainly go to the fair and have a presence, but it will be sort of one event, which is not really part of a comprehensive effort yet, because we are still in the process of laying out that plan.
But we have had conversations about the fair, and one of the 2 positions that we're actually starting to work towards hiring very soon are outreach fellows, and part of the job for the outreach fellows will be attending events like the fair and tabling for us there. So
I think that would be a great time to get some interns in, to have interns staff the fair booth and really start getting some sort of energy. No pun intended. So how about you use synergy? But really get some excitement around the program. I think it's a missed opportunity if we're not out there on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yes, and as soon as we have our budget approved, we'll be able to make those hires or paid internships.
Well, if you have any problems connecting with the fair, I'm happy to help.
Okay, thank you very much.
So let's get the budget approved.
The next slide is general and administration. So this covers a wide variety of things from office space to dues and subscriptions. The big driver of our dues and subscriptions cost here is our dues to CCAS, our trade association. Those are forecast to be in excess of $300,000 for the next year. For office, I do just want to note that we are currently in a temporary office situation. We are, over the course, I would say, of the next month, going to be conducting a survey of a variety of options, really focusing on sort of a core set of markets around BART stations and then coming back probably at the next board meeting with a presentation on here are our findings from the analysis that we've done, costs, comparables, and then sort of seeking some input from the board based on the findings from that survey to then go out and actually try to find a long-term home for EBCE.
Well, I mean, as you approach that, nothing says we have to be in Oakland.
And we are looking beyond Oakland. So I think we're looking...
Especially with the way the rents are going in Oakland now.
We're looking, I think, sort of, again, the major constraint for us is proximity to BART, and then actually having space that can accommodate our needs. So we're looking, I'd say Ashby BART is probably as far north as we'll go, and Hayward BART is probably about as far south out to Castro Valley. So that's sort of the general vicinity where we're conducting our survey. Those give you sort of general, you're not too far south, not too far north, not too far east.
Yeah, and maybe we're too early for this, but I would like to look at buying a building as opposed to leasing it.
You know, I did have a conversation with a broker about the possibility of buying, and their major concern was our lack of credit. But you know, it's something that we can evaluate. So they said they would
Find a new broker. Find a new broker.
Find a new broker. Okay.
He doesn't seem to like us already.
So they did say in the survey they will include some buy options. So that will be something that at least we can look at and, you know, kind of consider what the cost of buying versus renting. But their recognition is renting. So, so next slide, other professional services. So as mentioned a little bit ago, other professional services, these are really all of our consulting, legal costs. Pretty significant budget set aside for technical consulting. This is mostly related to supporting our energy procurement and the activities, and lots of the analysis that goes into energy procurement. There's actually, I believe on the consent agenda, the Edison Energy is one of the items that is contemplated in this technical consulting budget. So that's exactly the kind of thing that we're expecting to use this money for, is to hire technical experts to help us assess risk so that we can make informed energy procurement decisions.
Just a quick question. With respect to Sacramento advocacy, isn't that what our $300,000 is for with the California Community Choice Aggregate? What are we getting for the 180 that we're not already getting with the aggregate?
So in the trade association, there are 16 current members. It's potentially growing. There are differences of opinion as to sort of the advocacy that we should be pursuing. And so the Sacramento advocacy is to really give us our own eyes and ears and our ability to advocate on our behalf when there are sort of things that are, one, maybe not priorities for the broader group of CCAs. So maybe we're more interested in a specific kind of program, and other CCAs are not interested in a specific kind of program. So we may go and advocate for something differently than Cal CCA. Okay. And so the next slide is reserve contributions and proposed reserve policy. So one of the things that is really critical for a CCA as it sort of develops is setting aside reserves and sort of demonstrating our solvency to the market. It will result in much lower credit costs over time. We're proposing here we're budgeting for a policy that we're going to be actually bringing forward at the next executive committee meeting and then to the board in June, which is a policy to seek over time to get to a 50% of operating reserve. So 50% of our operating reserves would be set aside in cash or CDs that we can use as sort of the basis to go out and seek a credit rating. Why 50%? Well, based on feedback we've gotten from Moody's, 50% is sort of the expected threshold if you want to seek a AA or better rating. Actually, today, MCE was the first CCA to get a credit rating, and one of the in the findings they got a triple B plus, a triple B, And one of the things that was pointed to as a catalyst to get a better rating was increasing their reserves. They're currently at 100 days. Getting to 150 or more days would be a catalyst for them to improve their credit rating. So now that's obviously something that will take time. It's not going to happen year one. So what we're budgeting for here is 10% of annual revenue being allocated to a financial reserve, 1.5% of revenue being allocated to a rate stabilization reserve. That rate stabilization reserve would be focused on kind of contributing to ensuring that every year we can continue to offer rates that are less expensive than those of PG&E, and then a 2.5% collateral reserve. So as I mentioned earlier, we have to post collateral when we buy energy. And so this is sort of building that fund up, so we're not having to use debt. We're actually paying for that collateral from cash on hand. Okay. So next one, local development. This is a bit of a placeholder as we work to finalize the local development business plan. As I said, we did work with the local development business plan consultants to try to arrive at what is a number that is meaningful, but not so big that we're going to have, we're going to be challenged in our ability to effectively manage those funds as they're moved, as they're invested, right? We don't actually want to invest so much so quickly that we can't manage it and we're not making sort of smart investments. So that's sort of where the $2 million, it's a bit of the Goldilocks zone, I think, for this year, where we're still focusing a lot on launch and just getting ourselves up and going. And then finally, the end of year surplus. So we are forecasting a $1.8 million surplus. That's after we allocate a little over $40 million to reserves, and we spend $2 million on local development. Now, there's a lot of options for ways to spend surplus. Our hope is that we far exceed this surplus. And so this slide just illustrates some of what are the relative impacts of different ways of spending the money. So you can take $1.5 million, and that would allow you to give an annual bill credit of $15 to every customer who's on CARE, which is the low income rate. You could invest $1 million, and that would allow you to effectively buy a megawatt of solar in Alameda County and pay for the above market costs of that energy. $1 million towards debt repayment would reduce interest expense by over $100,000 in a year. $1 million invested in renewable energy is the equivalent of 5,000 residents going 100% renewable for a year. And finally, a $2 million sort of credit or dividend at the end of the year would effectively double the average residential customer's discount. So those are just sort of different examples of how reserves can be used, or surplus can be used, and I think that's a conversation we were going to want to have going into the next fiscal year.
That's it?
That's it.
So, colleagues, I have two speakers. Would you mind holding questions until I get the two speakers up? Okay, Barbara Stebbins and then Al Weinrab.
I'm Barbara Stebbins with East Bay Clean Power Alliance.
Now.
There you go. Yeah.
Barbara Stebbins, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. So we certainly support the idea of building strong reserves towards a good credit rating, which will really be the way in which we can invest large amounts of money in developing local renewable resources, which to us are the way to really bring the most benefit to residents throughout Alameda County. We definitely would rather see any surplus money. We would like to see a bigger investment, though, in the local development business fund. We think $2 million doesn't really show any kind of real commitment into all of that planning that has gone into the local development business plan. We would like to see 2 million more. We have talked about that coming out of the reserve because we're not quite clear exactly how that 43 million is determined. We could see that maybe it should come out of the unexpected surplus that's going to happen because this is all projected on a 10% opt-out, 10% opt-out rate, which is probably at least twice what we're going to see in Alameda County. So we would like to see at least some additional, like doubling of the budget for the local development business plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Al?
Al Weinrove again, and I'm actually representing Jessica Tovar, who couldn't be here this evening because she's speaking at an event in Southern California. But basically, there's been a lot of discussion within the activist community around the budget, and we do feel, as Barbara said, two things very strongly: that the local development business plan is really the centerpiece of what our program is all about. We haven't had any access to looking at what the plan that's going to be proposed by the team looks like and what it's going to call for, but we feel that that plan is really a community plan, and $2 million doesn't sound like a very aggressive start of that plan. Most of that money would not be invested in actual, directly building renewable energy resources. But if you looked at the work of the local development plan, there's many, many work products that talk about different programmatic efforts, both around conserving energy, around demand response, around new renewable development, and what else. All of this will require an infrastructure that's quite extensive in terms of people who plan these programs out, and that could start right at the very beginning of as soon as launch takes place, because that's going to be a long effort to develop those plans that actually materially result in changes. So the notion is that should be the budget is all about priorities, where you put stuff and when you don't, and we haven't had an ability to really talk to the community advisory committee about this because of lack of quorum in any substantial way. But at least in terms of the community, we feel that there has to be a real focus on the local development business plan, and its implementation. And then certainly when it comes to any excess revenues, we feel that dividends are a really bad idea. What dividends do is they give a little bit of money to every ratepayer, a very little bit of money, not enough to notice, when that money could actually go into the kind of programs that would make some real substantial difference to the community, both in terms of jobs, in terms of energy savings for individual building owners, and in terms of all the things that we've been talking about. So to take that money and to just spread it around is like, it's not a good way. The program should focus on what's going to make the program successful, and giving out money to people in very little amounts is not what's going to create a really qualitative difference in how this program functions. So on those 2 points, we sent out a letter earlier in the week, or at the very end of last week, to all of you, talking about these 2 points. One, the relative amount of money that goes into reserves and other things compared to the local development business plan, and we appreciate the $2 million. We don't think it's nearly aggressive enough. We haven't had a chance to look at what the LDVP team is putting out. But number two, that under no circumstances should money just go back into ratepayers, or it won't make any real difference in anybody's lives. It should go into real programmatic things that we've been working for a year to develop, and that's what will really make the difference in terms of the success of the program. So thank you very much. I hope that we can figure out a way to work this so that the priorities that we've been working on for the last full year, get reflected actually in the way the budget is organized. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Okay, so with that, I have no other speakers. I'll bring it back to the board for deliberation or action. Sophie, on.
Thank you very much. First, I'd just like to say that I appreciate the prudence that is demonstrated by the choices in this proposed budget. I feel very strongly that we need to have a solid foundation laid for this organization first before we start trying to build things on top of it. So I very much appreciate the emphasis on reserves and making sure we have a good credit rating, and all of those building blocks that that we'll be able to amplify our resources going forward. I also would like to add one request for the use of the surplus in the first year or two. And it follows on this theme of wanting to build a good foundation that ensures that in the long run, we're going to have the resources that we want to have to do local build and all the other things we want to do. And that is, I would like to see us put more money into a really strong customer retention program. I know that now we are going to have different cities are opting in at different levels for commercial, for residential, which means that we need different messaging in different communities. In some communities, we may need to emphasize staying in the program. In other communities, we may want to emphasize opting up from the 85% clean to 100%. And if we can really reduce any opt-outs and increase opt-ups in the first year or two, then I believe we'll have those customers forever. And to me, that is the most important thing we can do in the first 2 years, is to hold on to our customers and get them to stay in the program and opt up. So I would just like to put in a pitch for I think our window is very short, maybe the first year that people even notice that they have a new energy provider. And I'd like to put in a pitch that we consider using, if we are so lucky as to have surplus, that we really double down on that outreach and lower our opt-outs.
Thank you, Director Hahn. Anybody else? I'll get there, Director Martinez. I'm looking left. Al?
A question first for staff. I noticed that the recommendation isn't to pass the budget, it's just to discuss it. So are you looking for a motion to pass it tonight, or are you just wanting feedback and general discussion?
So sort of our thought was, this is our first opportunity for the board to see the budget. We didn't want to presume that you necessarily wanted to pass it, but the option is there if after discussion the will.
Okay.
Yeah. It says discuss and approve proposed budget.
Yep.
Was this noticed as an action item?
It says discuss and approve.
The memo, the staff report says recommendation discuss. The agenda says discuss and approve?
The agenda says discuss and approve.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we can go either way. All right. I realize I don't think we need to make decisions tonight about what to do with the surplus. We don't even know how large it is, and so that can come at a later date. I'm assuming maybe 6 or 8 months from now, as we have an idea of what it looks like. But I do want to just say that the idea of a dividend is not one that appeals to me. I think that of the items that were proposed there, I would say paying down our high interest debt. Because as I remember, the revolving line of credit had interest rates in the high single digits, like 6 to 9%.
Over 6%.
Yeah, ouch, right? So the faster we can pay that down, the better. And then funding putting additional money into the local development business plan, assuming there's capacity to spend that, right? And we'll have a better sense of that in the next, in the coming weeks as the plan gets rolled out and we start to think about what that looks like. So in the latter half of this year, we ought to be able to make better informed decisions about the right amount. And then there was, I don't want to, Ms. Eldred, are you planning to mention some of the comments that were made at the, okay, then I'll let you guys, there were some good comments at the CAC meeting that need to get shared, but I'll let you do that. So thank you.
Director Martinez?
Councilman, let him call on me. I want to echo some of Director Hahn's sentiments about the reserve policy that the staff has come forward with. I wholeheartedly agree, and I think we should really shoot to have strong reserves and get a good credit rating and be in a place where we can have a really big impact once we create bond capacity and really have some big local development happening. At the same time, and also I want to echo that I'm not that keen on dividends to all ratepayers. I think if we craft something that's for the people in most need at the time that there's most need, I think that's something that I would look at for the surplus. But for what I really want to look at for the surplus is to get money back into local development. And I understand having a specific number in the budget, the $2 million makes sense to me. But when we're talking about the surplus down the line, what I would envision is that part of that would go into local development, and then maybe a smaller portion of that would go back into dividends for our customers in most need, in their time of most need.
Director DiGiovanazzi, of course he's after that, and anybody else? Filch after that.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to echo that I don't like the idea of a customer dividend because, well, I'll just leave it at that. I don't like that idea at all. I think if we have it, we should think of a better way to spend it to improve things instead of saying, here's some extra, we'll give it back. And just coming on in January, I'm still trying to learn all of this stuff, and so I was really appreciative of this item. And finally, for me, maybe you folks saw it at some other time in the past, but this is the first time I'm actually seeing the budget and what the numbers are looking like, so I'm really thrilled about that. But I do have a question. Can you explain to me more about what's expected to this local development money to be used for? What kind of things are we building, or, I mean, I have no idea.
Yep, absolutely. This $2 million was not totally pulled out of a hat. We didn't want to sort of put a lot of detail because we're waiting to finalize the plan, but there's a range of things. I also will say, in the budget, we have, say, 2 staff who are dedicated to local development. So we have a director of local development and a local development manager. So those are not counted in the $2 million. That's sort of human capital that we're bringing on board to manage programs and do lots of good things. So $2 million is not necessarily reflective of all the resources, but the kinds of things that are being contemplated range from deploying solar on municipal properties. So some of the $2 million is to pay for the cost difference between what it costs to buy solar energy from, anywhere in California, from a large unit somewhere in California, versus what it would cost to build it on a wastewater treatment center in Hayward. So part of it is to cover that cost difference. That's a portion. Part of it is to cover the adders that we've actually previously approved for net metering. So we have adders for net metering systems that are built on low-income residents or on municipal buildings. Some of it is to pay for pilot programs to be able to study innovative ownership models for solar for community shared solar. So we want to be able to actually pay for sort of those ideas to be studied, and so that projects can be brought forward after some thorough review. So those are the kinds of things that the $2 million would be spent towards, or whatever final number we arrive at is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And then another question I have, because there's this concern about opting out. So can you give me an example maybe of why somebody might want to opt out? Because I'm thinking everybody's, except for the couple of cities that have chosen otherwise, are being opted in at a discount of 1.5%. So in my mind, I'm having trouble figuring out why anybody would be wanting to opt out, especially if it's seamless and they're not even understanding what's going on.
So I think there are 2 or 3 different sort of primary reasons we see. So one is they don't want government in their business. So that's definitely a portion of customers we have in our customer relationship management system. There are reasons why, and folks, there's some portion that they don't like the idea of government taking over a service. One is they don't like the idea of being automatically defaulted. So they say, well, I should have been able to make a choice. A third is just lack of familiarity. This is new. I know what I'm getting with PG&E. Maybe they don't fully understand the difference, the fact that they'll still be a customer of PG&E. And then I think fourth is we saw with one very large landlord, they were concerned about reputation risk for their tenants. So if something were to happen, say there was a blackout, the tenant wouldn't know the difference wouldn't know necessarily that PG&E is still responsible for keeping the lights on, and something bad were to happen, they would say, oh, you tenant, you landlord, you switched my energy from PG&E to East Bay Community Energy, and it's your fault that, my industrial process was ruined. I don't want to do business with you anymore. So that's the kind of customer. It's sort of like, that's not true, but it's a perception issue. And so that's one of those items where, we're actively going out and talking to them and trying to sort of walk them back. We will be talking on the next item about this demand response pilot that is specifically aimed at trying to retain our customers. But those are really, I think, the four reasons why. And I would say the most common is people not liking the idea of being sort of forced to do something.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Director Bonacorsi?
Yes, first of all, I want to associate myself with Director Martinez's comments about the dividends. I don't like it, but I do think if there's an equity issue that we could look at that in terms of where we would have the dividends. Have you run the numbers? I think I have no objection with a 10% placeholder for the opt-out, but let's say it's 8% or 5%. I know that that would result in additional expenditures, but I assume it would result in additional revenues. What is the delta per each percentage? Is there a way of calculating that?
So yes, we have a margin analysis that we've done. The problem with sharing the margin analysis, you can start to sort of back out what our energy costs are, and some of that is market sensitive. So what I will say is lower opt-outs will mean higher surplus.
Okay. And so what I would think is part of the discussion that Al referred to is maybe we can have a separate discussion about being optimistic. If it's 7% or 6%, what will we do with that delta, and have that discussion? So if the numbers come in, does it go to local business development? Does it go to some other issues in terms of retaining our customer base? But we at least have that as a placeholder discussion, so that if we are optimistic and we do better, we know what to do with the money.
And I think that particularly in this first year, a lot of these numbers are estimates. I think in our next fiscal year, we'll have we'll know what our expenses are. We'll have a lot clearer sense of what our revenues are going to be. So I guess I sort of view this as somewhat iterative, that, we're going to be watching these things very closely. And so if we're seeing a much lower opt-out rate, that's an opportunity to come back to the board and say, we want to adjust this. To some degree, part of the reason to put this budget out now is just to get a sense of what our budget for things like office space is going to be, or like how much personnel we should be going out and hiring, what the salary ranges are. So those are the things where we really need, all right, let's set a budget so we know that we cannot spend more than our X dollars for office space. And some of the other stuff I think we recognize we have to sort of watch and kind of continually update the board on. And I think this is good feedback that we want to prioritize, obviously, local development as we have more funds to spend.
You're in the queue. Director Pilch.
Yeah, just want to echo briefly the comments against the dividend program and for supporting the local development plan. And I thought the comments about the making sure that we're doing enough marketing and outreach to retain customers and to inform customers about our program and its benefits were good as well. That's it.
Director Allred.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to preface this with, we have not made quorum in a while, and so there is no official recommendation from the Community Advisory Committee. As we have not made quorum, I have done my best to present the board's agendas to the advisory committee members who could make it in the public based off of briefing discussions with our CEO, who has been very generous in his time to present that information to me. Most of our discussion on this dividends and local development business plan actually fell under the next item, but as it's being discussed here, in summary, we were recognizing that staff put forth that it's not a decision we have to make tonight about how that money is spent. And the general feeling, again, not an official recommendation, but the general feeling is that that is something that a committee of the Community Advisory Committee and the staff could take a look at to form a recommendation on what to do with those dollars as they become real, because there's a lot of potential outcomes as different legislative things comes through and our opt-out rates are real and the PCIA is decided and that kind of thing. So
okay, anybody else? Sophie.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that my suggestion was kind of a one-time thing, and that I strongly support putting more into local development. But I view retaining customers as a means to have more money in the long run. And so, as part of my thinking about setting a strong foundation in the first year, possibly in the first 2 years, but my guess is just in the first year, for me, customer retention and opt-ups are really high priority. Just 1 year or 2 years at most.
And now a word from our attorney.
So while the agenda allows for you to approve the budget tonight, and our JPA doesn't require it be done by resolution, I would prefer that it be done by resolution. So unless there's a strong consensus from the board to pass it tonight, then we can bring back a resolution in June.
So,
Mr. Chair.
Hold on. So, I'm sorry. I want to understand what you said, because are you saying that if there's a unanimous vote to approve it tonight, you're okay with that? Or are you saying unless the board strongly feels we need to go forward with it tonight? Because, I mean, this is just a budget. I don't see why we need a resolution.
Well, I like to memorialize things like this, especially our first budget. But if you, I'm not saying that you need a unanimous vote. That's not what the JPA requires. It's just a majority vote. And if you want to vote on it tonight, you can. If not, we can do it by resolution at the next meeting.
Pleasure of the board. Al? I'm sorry, somebody was down there.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat my issue with the agendization of this item. I mean, I accept your ruling that we are allowed to vote on it, but I find it highly ambiguous at best that it's listed as a discussion item while other items are listed as an action item, and the staff report refers to it, as discussion item and makes no mention of adoption. So it just seems under the intent of the Brown Act to avoid ambiguity that it would be preferable to carry it over, bring it back with a resolution and do it right.
So being that Director Rood has an uneasy feeling, and probably rightly so, and others are doing the old head nod, we'll just bring it back with a resolution next time. It's not that big a deal. Although I hope you continue to try to get in at the fair without your budget. Did you want to say something, Al?
So I'll echo those comments and just add that I would like staff to come back at the next meeting as part of that budget with a plan for a mid-year budget revise, probably in Q3 of the fiscal year, January, March. Once we have a sense of the opt-outs, once we have a sense of our actual costs, once we have a sense of what that actual surplus will be, so that we can start having that conversation about, okay, we're having more or less revenue or whatever surplus than we thought, what are we going to do about it? And not wait until June of next year to begin that conversation. So I'd ask that be part of staff's recommendation when it comes back next month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe with a shorter slide presentation next time. Or the Warriors aren't playing. Okay, so then we will move on to item 13.
Right, so item 13 is the adoption of Phase 2 residential rate, or Phase 2, which is the residential phase rates. So the recommendation here is to adopt the same rates as Phase 1, but also memorialize what the 100% renewable energy premium will be. So at the last meeting we approved, I guess it was last meeting, we approved the product with a methodology. So we have applied the methodology, and what we've ended up with is a 1 cent premium above PG&E's costs for the 100% renewable rate. I think, the main considerations here are, in light of the budget discussion, you will note, yes, there are some perhaps modest conservative assessments around things like opt-outs. I will say that we are finding that energy costs are higher than expected due to some sort of somewhat unforeseen and unique circumstances that are happening at the moment. So that there's volatility there. And so our general recommendation for Phase 2, based particularly on sort of our budget, is to keep our Phase 2 discounts at parity with what they are for Phase 1.
I have 3 speakers. Any questions before I like to go to the speakers? All right, Megan O'Neill, Barbara Stebbins, Hal Weinreb.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Megan O'Neill. I'm a member of the Community Advisory Committee. And as we didn't have a quorum on Monday, I just wanted to make a few comments to you guys at the board. I also, as an aside, am very excited to have our 3 new Community Advisory Committee members here. Thank you. So I personally recognize the need to set the rates at this meeting, given the schedule and the launch. And I don't want to block this. I did support it in our discussion on Monday. I did want to come and voice concern that this week is the first time that this particular item was on the agenda. That this residential rate, setting residential rates, is obviously a very important issue to the community, and there should be a robust discussion about it, we feel, and it's been something that we have asked to talk about really since we had the discussions around the municipal and commercial rates. So it was concerning that the first time it came up, it was a decision item. I think it was a good point that, and I really appreciate the staff responding to this about other critical issues in the past, that we have them as discussion items first so that we can have adequate time to actually give input, and then it comes up as a decision item. And so I wanted to just voice the concern that that didn't happen in this case, and ask that in the future that happens again, and that next year for setting rates we have more of a discussion and community involved decision process. Thanks.
So I'm just going to echo what Megan said, but in not quite so polite a way, that I really think that it is the wrong thing for elected officials not to hear from the community when they're setting residential rates. I think that could be a big mistake. I don't think, given the rates that are proposed, that it probably will be, but I do think that it is not proper for an elected body, for a body run by elected officials, to make decisions like that without allowing a time. And you should remember that when we tried to talk about residential rates back when we were setting commercial rates, we were told these are just the municipal and commercial rates. So it really has not come back. It may feel to some of you like it has, but really it hasn't come back before this whole body before. Thank you.
Al?
It's been said.
Okay, Al says it's been said. Comments, questions, Al, Olivia? Durf Dahlrod?
So again, this is not an official recommendation from the Community Advisory Committee. We did want to acknowledge that staff did bring forth at that meeting the opportunity to withdraw the item, and delay a month so that the CAC could achieve quorum with our new members. Welcome very much. And that no one who participated in that community discussion felt that that delay was necessary, but we really did appreciate the respect that staff did show the community in that stance, especially as it has been requested to be agendized for months. But that said, no one also objected to the rates being offered, and the majority of the discussion was based around the desire for next year a robust discussion based off of the data that we will then have about our own customers, because at this point it's being set off of general data from PG&E as opposed to our data from our customers, and a committee working with staff on what to do with that surplus revenue.
Director Reard.
I'm in favor of the proposal. I do, however, wish to point out just a communication issue that has arisen in my community as we consider our default power option. The fact that Bright Choice is priced as a percentage discount from PG&E, while 100% renewable is priced as a per kilowatt hour add-on to PG&E, is confusing for people because they don't know how to compare the two. It's kind of an apples and oranges thing. So if there's a way to, percentize the 1 cent per kilowatt hour, I would be in favor of that sort of way of communicating it, even if the benchmark is, I realize then it gets hard to have them both be accurate. But so, you see my point.
Absolutely, and the reason why we ended up with 1 cent, not a 10%, say, or 5%, it has to do with the way the billing system works. So if it was a percentage, you would have to develop a whole new set of rates. Whereas if it's an adder, you can use the existing rates and you just add it on. So part of it just had to do also with the presentation on the bill. So I think the view generally was a 1 cent adder is a cleaner bill presentations for the customer. But certainly we can go through the process of giving you, generally this is a 7 to 8%, and that will be accurate for the vast majority of customers. So happy to follow up with that.
Anybody else? Al, were you pointing down? Yeah. I'll get there. Al. Oh, Director Thomas?
Just going back to some of the concerns about outreach to residents, just kind of made me think really quick. Do you have any plans in regards to just trying to use social media just as a kind of an outreach? I just kind of popped up on the Facebook page, and it looks like nothing's really been posted there in a while. And so I'm just thinking as a possible alternative of being able to put that out, which allows residents as well as be able to just share that information with people who are their friends with, or, whether you want to throw out a Twitter post or whichever form of social media that you would want to use to just at least try to have those touches with residents as well, and not just, putting some of the weight on some of our folks here in the audience. So any kind of plan with that, or is that got to steer over to the marketing to update the Facebook page here and anything else?
Yes. Yeah, Annie, please speak to that.
So I will be interested to know which Facebook page you're looking at, because we do have a monthly calendar and there are new posts about every 2 to 3 days. That is not the correct page. That is, I believe, the Clean Energy Alliance's.
First one that pops up. So.
Yeah, this one is facebook.com/East Bay Community Energy, I believe is the URL. I'm happy to circulate that. It's also linked to our website. So we do. So Circle Point, that is one of the things that they are currently doing. The messaging is a little bit more geared to businesses at this point. The announcements are about, hey, you should have received this notification in the mail. They're doing some FAQs or tips about energy saving as we go into the warmer months. But they do provide all of the content, and they do graphics that I review at the sort of the end of every month for the following month. And the schedule is approximately, I'd say, every other day or so.
Okay, so then maybe my suggestion to you folks,
Yeah.
is maybe one of the things is if we're not all on the Facebook page, you send us out, you friend us, right? So then if you're going to put the information out, then we're going to get it on our feed, and then we'll be able to put it out as well. So we'll be able to be that mouthpiece for you, right? Because in all honesty, look, unless I'm at this meeting and getting the updates, I'm not going home after this or sometime this week and going, oh, let me go jump on the Facebook page and see what they're posting today, right? Versus if you just go ahead and friend us now, right, then it's going to show up on our feeds, you know, and are you going to send out a tweet? Maybe you're going to send out a tweet and you're going to, you know, for those of us that are on Twitter, you're going to, you know, wrap us into that feed somehow. So
Absolutely.
Just some thoughts.
Thank you for that feedback.
Okay.
I have somebody this way. Director Verdacci and then Martinez.
I've got a question that's almost on point, but it is on the residential rates. So,
okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. In any case, what the question is, I thought in the materials I've read and what's come out that the residential folks can actually get on board sooner than the launch date for residential, because with the commercial launching June 1st, again, there's the flyers that, because since I have my own business, there's been materials that have come out as well, and I thought I read something in it that said residential could jump in before the launch date for residential.
There was an opportunity for early adoption, so unfortunately that was limited to just over 100 spots.
Oh darn, because I was so excited thinking, wow, why wouldn't we do this? So, okay, so now everybody else is just stuck waiting then until their launch date for residential. All right, thank you.
Director Martinez.
Thank you. For the 100% renewable product, I was just wondering where we're at, Annie, in refining our messaging, because to me, and I've made this request before, 1 cent per kilowatt hour doesn't mean anything to me because I don't know how many kilowatt hours my household uses in a month. So it would be easier for me to have that explained in a little chart that showed average single-family residence, average multifamily residence, small, medium, large business, what that actually means to people's pocketbooks, and that helps me communicate with constituents in my city.
And appreciate that everyone is very eager to get that information. Yes. So we're moving forward on several fronts all at once. So of course we continue to push for our phase 1 launch of commercial and non-residential customers. So in fact today the third batch of the second notice went to the post office. So this means we have one more batch, and then we've completed all of our pre-enrollment notification, and then we actually begin enrolling customers next month. And we will of course have a launch event in San Leandro on June 7th that I'm hoping everyone here will participate in. So we've been focused on that. At the same time, we are doing some preparation and planning for phase 2, and that includes a number of things. One is in fact this is for phase 1 still, but a joint rate comparison with PG&E. This is required under the California code that governs CCAs, and as part of that, excuse me, they take the majority of rate classes that are served within Alameda County and show the PG&E rate for their standard, Solar Choice, and our products as a comparison chart. And then at the bottom of that, they say, here's the average consumer's bill, and this is all based on data from our communities.
And when would we see that?
So that currently is in draft. There were some, PG&E develops it, and so we're providing them QA and feedback right now. We are required to have it within 60 days of launch. I estimate we're going to have that sooner. It will come out with only Bright Choice and Brilliant 100. At the time when we offer the third product, we will bring that in, which then gets me to your initial question, which is what are we doing about branding and messaging? So I've been working with Circle Point. We've been doing some brainstorming. They gave me some initial feedback this week, and I've asked them to go back, tweak it a little bit. But we've been holding off on doing any sort of broader feedback survey because we contracted with Interethnica. You might all remember this. Several months ago, we decided that we wanted to do some market research that really focused on our Alameda communities and specifically to residential customers. So they completed the 423 intercept surveys at, I believe it was 8 to 10 locations throughout the county. And there is a another firm that's actually putting together a market segmentation, identifying personas to help us better understand our customers, and then compiling all of the results from that Intercept in-person survey. The deadline was today. I'm hoping to have it by the end of the week. So we really want to use that information to help inform us about the messaging, the branding, the name, what is resonating with those people in our community and how they think about carbon-free versus renewable energy, which is a nuance that is tough for people to digest.
Great, thank you. I hope you'll just be mindful that we're eager for that information.
Absolutely.
And then my second question for staff is, Nick, if you wouldn't mind addressing just the process for rate setting in the future, just hearing the community's comments in wanting a wider berth for a feedback loop. Can you talk about what this process will look like next time around?
Yes, actually, we have been discussing this fairly extensively. Given our short time this year, we just are not able to support sort of the rate setting process we like. So I think what we have been discussing is Leia's been sort of taking the lead. So why don't you sort of share the timelines that we've been working on?
There are a number of policies that need to be updated for EBCE, and we're moving so fast that our hope is that over the summer, perhaps the July meeting or the September meeting, will bring back a rate setting policy that will include, so our implementation plan obligates that we actually have a public comment period when we change rates, not initial setting, but when we change rates. And so all of that will be laid out in a policy that we'll bring back to you either July or September.
And I think the timelines from there would be, commencing sort of the rate setting process sort of in the winter with the idea, rates that would take effect, I think April, May tends to be a good time, just given sort of what our costs of service, it's sort of a flat load month. So if you were to say, as an example, if you wanted to set new rates every April, you'd want to come out in February with sort of you'd want to start the process there. So you have sort of a nice 2-month process. Here's our recommendation, public comment, there's adequate time for review, and then they were to go into effect. So I think but those are the kinds of details that would be developed in this policy that would be brought for community discussion and then to the board for final ratification kind of in that July, September timeframe.
Thank you.
Director Mandel.
So I heard... Yeah. Mr. Chassid, I heard a few dates there. So when would you project that we would be setting the rates next year? Did you say April to finalize it?
I think generally, I think you want to set rates sort of around when you're setting a budget.
Yeah.
So sort of, if you set a budget on a fiscal year, you may want to set maybe not April, maybe it's May, June.
Okay. So thank you. Sorry to cut you off. But so where I was going with the previous item and asking for that mid-year budget revise is I want to make sure we have that before we're, certainly before we decide on rates for next year, but hopefully before we get too deeply into that process. And if we start that rate setting process in November or December, we're obviously not going to have, a mid-year budget update at that point. It's just too soon. So that there's some work to be done in terms of coming up with a timeline that provides robust public input, gets us the information we need about our actual budget situation, and then sets the rates. And so I'd ask you to spend a little more time on that, in the coming months, and then hopefully come back to us with a plan, if not by next month, and certainly by the end of the summer.
Yeah, and I think that those are the kinds of details that would be included in the rate setting policy. Yeah, and my only caution there is that this year's process may not be quite identical to future years, because in future years we'll have past budgets and actual numbers, much earlier. This year it's coming later, and so we might need to do something a little different this year. Yeah, there's the added complexity of, there's an argument you want to set your rates on a calendar year, but we don't want to set new rates. Residential customers start service in November, they get their first bill in December, and then suddenly their rates change. Mm-hmm. So there's some catch up. So I think there's some thinking we're going to have to do about what's the cycle we want to be on in the long term? the catch-up process.
Of course, that's only a bad thing if we're raising rates, not if we're holding
Fair
steady
enough.
or lowering, which is my hope.
Yeah.
So, on this agenda item specifically, I'm fine with this. I think that it's very important for us to have that robust conversation next year, as a couple folks have already pointed out. That's when we'll be able to make more informed decisions. And so I'm not inclined to tinker with the rates for the residential rollout at this point for that reason, trusting that we're going to have a robust process next year. And I actually really like EBCE's Twitter feed. I was found by them, I don't know, a month or two ago, and have been liking and retweeting stuff for a while now. There's some cool videos and things on there. So maybe look a little harder, man, but it's out there.
I'm just saying if we've got a marketing company and they're putting stuff out, then maybe they should market to the board too.
Yes, definitely. All right.
I agree.
So thank you, Chair.
Maybe the chair. All right. So where are we at? I have no other. Is there a motion or anything?
So I'll move the staff recommendation for the rates for the three products.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second by Martinez. Is there any dissension? Okay, that motion will pass unanimously then. Not just going to call for a roll call vote, but it passed unanimously, so we'll move to item 14.
Taj, will you come up and present on this item? I'll just sort of say this is a really exciting item for us to present. It's a sort of an illustration of kind of a lot of the principles of the local development business plan being put into action. So very excited to share this with everyone.
Hello, thank you for your time. So today I'm just going to be talking about an action item related to asking for your giving you a recommendation to approve a pilot demand response program for our commercial and industrial customers that are launching in phase 1. So just to give you the context, demand response is a set of activities that are geared at providing incentives to customers, financial incentives typically, so that they can reduce their energy consumption during critical hours. Typically, that's because you're trying to achieve one of many benefits, and the LDBP has some really good background information on demand response, but you're trying to achieve several types of benefits. You're trying to make sure the system stays reliable because you don't want demand to exceed supply. You want to take advantage of better prices because during those hours of critical demand, the prices on the spot markets tend to be really high. So you want to avoid having to buy really expensive energy if you're uncovered on the spot market. And then the third thing is you're trying to avoid the need for peaker power plants that may be triggered by a sudden ramp up of energy consumption. So if you can bring down that energy consumption, you may avoid having to signal to those peaker power plants that they need to get ready to generate. So PG&E has this whole suite of demand response programs. The majority of those programs are compatible with CCA service. There's one program called Peak Day Pricing, which unfortunately is not. So that's a program that if our customers decide to stay with CCA service, they will lose that program. It is considered a default but optional program, much like CCA service, in the sense that customers are defaulted onto it, but it is optional. They can take themselves out of that program if they want to. Starting in 2010 or 11, I believe PG&E started to roll their commercial industrial customers onto that program by default in phases. So one of the interesting things about this program is that some customers don't even know that they're on that program, but they're getting the event notifications and they're effectively participating in the program. So the way the program works is that it runs during the summer, and customers receive notification on up to 15 days in the year during the summer. PG&E decides those days the day ahead, and they receive a notice, typically an email or a phone call saying tomorrow is a critical peak day. If you don't reduce your consumption between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m., we're going to surcharge you for that consumption. In exchange for that, they get lower rates during the entire summer. Okay? Any questions on how the logistics of this work? So there are 30,000 EBC customers in phase 1 that are on a critical peak pricing program right now, which represents about 30,000 of our load. For some of these customers, the credits that they receive during the summer represent upwards of $100,000. or some up to 7% of their summer bill. So this is a program that can be very significant to some of our customers. If you look at the population, you have some customers that are fully aware of this program and are actively managing their load, responding to the program, and getting that credit, that benefit back from that. Then you have some customers that don't necessarily respond to it. So as I said, this is not compatible with CCA's service. We cannot, at least the way currently, we cannot let the customers stay on that program. So we'll go to the next slide. Actually, I can go to the third slide. I think they got turned around. So our proposal is to provide a pilot to our customers that mimics the peak day pricing program. Just to give you a context of what other CCAs are doing right now, some CCAs choose to do nothing. They don't tell their customers that these two things are incompatible. They let the customer inform themselves, and they let the customer make their own decisions whether they want to opt in or opt out of the CCA service or of the PDP program. Other CCAs will send notification saying, just so that you know there is an incompatibility between these two services, and you will be opted out of PDP once you stay with the CCA service. Then there are other CCAs that provide a form of bill protection to their customers. It's effectively guaranteeing their customers that they will recalculate their bills as if they had been on PDP and credit them a certain amount to their bills to compensate them for the fact that they're no longer getting that PDP benefit. Some of those CCAs will do it on a on-demand basis. The customer has to come and say, I want to do this. Other CCAs will do it for all their customers. What's really important to understand here is that you're not getting a demand response benefit when you're just issuing a blanket credit to the customer. You're not actually notifying them of the event. So we would be the first CCA, along with another one this summer, to actually try to send a notice to the customer, to tell the customer, hey, we need your help. We need you to reduce your demand. There's a critical event day tomorrow. In exchange for that, you'll get the credit for participating in the program during the rest of the summer. So that requires us to be able to notify the customers, and we've investigated how we can do that, and we have a plan in place for doing that. And it will then require us to calculate credits and surcharges at the end of the summer, and then if there's any net credit due to the customer, to issue that credit to those customers. The pilot we're proposing is a pilot that is only going to be focused on 100 customers, because we're really trying to narrow the overhead of that program, and we're focusing it on E19 and E20 customers, which are our very largest customers, commercial and industrial, think of manufacturing. Those are the customers that typically are fully aware that they're in PDP program and are managing against the PDP program. So if we switch back to the previous slide, sorry, Stephanie. So I know it's late in the day, but I like graphs. So this is trying to show you let's focus on the graph on the left. This is 24 hours on the x-axis, and then you have a set of bars, and they're telling you hour by hour how a regular customer and a PDP customer, the difference in their load hour by hour. So you'll notice that for the graph on the left, that during most of the hours, customers that participate in PDP events tend to actually have lower load throughout the night until about 6 or 7 p.m. when they start to have higher load. But now the red bars versus the blue bars are telling you what that difference is like during regular days versus days when the event is actually called. So you'll see that the red bars definitely deepen compared to the blue bars during those hours in that blue box that are the event hours. So that's telling you that these customers are, first of all, they have lower load during those hours, but they're deepening their reduction in consumption during those hours. What the graph on the right is showing you is just your other sets of customers, how they are participating. So hopefully that was somewhat clear. So what this is showing you is that these customers actually have interesting load shapes to begin with, because they use less during hours where things are typically not in a reliability mode and not expensive. And then when you send them a signal to deepen their reduction, they actually respond. The next slide, and all of this is based on historical data that we've collected from PG&E, so this is all based on 2017, where there was 15 events called. So we'll go to the next slide, this slide. So yeah, impacts. So we've done an analysis, very back of the envelope, to try and determine what this would have if we had everybody that could enroll, and the biggest customers that could enroll in the program. The cost impacts would be on the order of $200,000 to $400,000 in credits that we would have to issue to the customers at the end of the season. Now remember, we don't know how many events are going to be called, and we actually don't know what the actual load shapes of those customers are going to be, so that's why that's a range. The benefits, and I'm being conservative here by showing you qualitative benefits rather than quantitative benefits, but there's multiple benefits. First of all, it's going to enable us to be providing to our customers a product set and a value option that's identical to PG&E. So some of these largest customers are fully aware, and during our outreach, we've been very clear with them that there is this incompatibility. They know that they're losing money effectively by enrolling in the East Bay Community Energy programs. So this is ensuring us the ability to give those customers an incentive to stay within the service territory because we're on par with PG&E products. It's also going to reduce or enable us to reduce demand during those peak hours, which are hours that potentially will be very expensive. So if we have less energy to buy or we have less exposure during those hours, we effectively have less cost to us. It will also continue to provide the reliability benefit and that peaker plant benefit. And I think what's most important is it's going to respect really the spirit of what peak day pricing is all about, which is to provide a mechanism to send a signal to the customer to do something for the grid and for California in general. And instead of just issuing out a blanket credit, which is what other CCAs are doing, we're actually encouraging them to respond to a peak day demand pricing signal. The other thing that this is going to enable us to do is it's really going to be our first foray into actually having a customer program. So I think it's very early on for a CCA to be running a program at this stage, but because we're limiting it, because we think we understand the mechanics, this is really going to help us understand what the mechanics of that program look like and how that program really should be run in the future. Personally, I don't think 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. are necessarily the right hours for a peak demand pricing program for the County of Alameda. So in the future, we could actually, from learning how to make this work successfully, tailor that program in the future to a different set of customers with a different set of hours. And by having given these customers the opportunity today to remain within our service by giving them this incentive, we will be encouraging customers that have demonstrated that they are willing to change their load shape in exchange for a financial benefit, that we're going to encourage them to stay with us. And in the future, we're going to encourage them to continue to work with us in different types of demand response. And obviously, demand response is one of the key things of the local development business plan. So that's what we're hopeful that this is going to be a really important set of lessons for us to learn. That's it.
Director Martinez.
Are these cost impacts that are predicted included in the budget that we looked at?
So yes, so from a sort of a programmatic standpoint, these are the kinds of things that are contemplated as local development activities. I think from the purpose of to say this is going to cost $400,000 out of a $2 million budget, I think that actually that's probably not accurate because there's a netting effect, right? That like there is increased revenue or there is reduced expense that we're going to see because we're not buying energy. And I think there's another important point about this program, and frankly, it's one of the benefits about local development. It's getting the customer retention. I'll just sort of share an anecdote. One of our largest customers was going to opt out because they participate in PDP. When we offered them this opportunity, they have now decided to opt up.
We also, one thing that I forgot to say is we also did a kind of an analysis of what the margins are associated with these things. So this still enables us to keep customers that are providing margins to us. So effectively by retaining these customers, we're effectively retaining an income to us, because by losing those customers, we just don't have any margin to make on them. So the margin's reduced for sure because we're giving them these credits, but there's still a positive margin that's coming to EBCE. So it's bringing in to our reserves.
Yeah, at the risk of showing my ignorance here, it's a terrible preface for a question. I understand peak demand. I understand reducing expenses. I understand compatibility with PG&E as a way of reducing opt-outs. What I don't understand, and this is not necessarily reason not to support the pilot program, what I don't understand is if you mapped the volatility within the energy market that would generate a peak demand signal in PG&E, are those the same kind of pressures if we're a CCA, or are we just mirroring what are we going to watch what PG&E is doing for signaling it, or is there some parallel process that we would be doing at the same time to get to the same place? Is my question clear?
Yeah, okay. Your question's clear. The mechanism right now for calling a peak day event day is actually just temperature. So it's a very good proxy for the hotter it gets, especially a certain number of days in sequence. That is basically telling the California ISO, PG&E, Southern California Edison that you're going to have a potential issue with this demand really reaching a certain level. So it's driven by weather, and we right now we plan to just follow what PG&E is doing. But if this is successful and we get your approval to do it next year, we plan to do it based on potentially different sets of indicators. It could be our local weather, it could be our local needs, our local resource adequacy requirements potentially that would drive us to make those calls, which are independent then from what PG&E is doing. Yes.
Director Pilch.
We recently completed a new city building maintenance center, and the director of Public Works was pointing out to me that they had installed, I'm not exactly sure what, but some method of getting an electric or electronic signal from PG&E about these events so that the systems could automatically respond to it. Is that something that we could hook into as well?
So I think
something that exists, or tell me about it.
Yeah, sure. I think what you're referring to, there's a program that was originated at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab called AutoDR, which is an automatic way of sending a signal for demand response, and that is fully compatible with CCA service. So we've talked to our customers, we've clarified for them that they can stay on AutoDR, they can continue to be customer of ours. It's this peak day pricing program, and one of the things that's actually the reason why this is a little bit late in the agenda is that the data we got from PG&E did not fully give us the picture of how many of our customers were on this program. Until we probed and we got correct data, we realized that the magnitude of the number of customers was tenfold. And so therefore, that's when we realized that we needed to potentially bring something to you for action. But yes, there's all sorts of other programs that are all compatible with CCA service. They will remain to be compatible with CCA service. And in the future, we would love to be able to develop our own types of demand response programs with our own technology partners, as you've described. And again, that's also in line with the recommendations of the LDBP.
Anybody else that way? Okay, I'm fishing for a motion. Thomas?
Quick question. Can you verify or explain when you say calls? You're going to be calling a customer. It's going to be a robocall. I'm just curious because you know, if it's me, if I see a number nowadays that pops up on my phone, I don't pick up, and if you leave a message, I don't even check that. You know, but if you shoot me a text message, you know, if you shoot me a text message or an email, I'm going to respond to that quicker than. Oh, there's a voicemail. Yeah, calls is just a general. Actually, the rule according to the PG&E tariff is that they don't even have to do anything. It's the customer's responsibility to go to a website and figure out whether it's an event day or not. What PG&E does is it enrolls email addresses and phone numbers that the customer provides as a way to receive notification. We would be doing the same thing. Okay. Fax is also an option. We don't have a fax machine, but if customers want to receive a fax, which I doubt, they still make those. We will do that. Yes.
Just to piggyback on that, I know that in the city of Dublin, we want to send out alerts to our residents. We do it via text, and we've gotten a great feedback on that. So we were just talking about that. I'm like, are they physically really going to call people? Because, no, honestly, people don't really answer the phones anymore, and they just send it straight to voicemail. But I mean, a quick text, they can glance, look at it, and then they can go back to it when they have time to see it.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, one thing that we'll offer our customers as well. And again, this is just a pilot, so in the future, we would not be like having our interns.
That's just a little bit, ancient times, that's why, so.
Yes.
Any other questions? This is an action item.
Move for approval.
Moved by Ducci-Vanacci.
Second.
Seconded by the busy Pilch tonight. Is there any objection to the motion? Thank God you showed up today, Pilch. I appreciate that. Motion passed without objection. Item 15. Who put this agenda together?
So, item 15 is an informational item, and it is a East Bay Community Energy. We are planning to issue a request for proposals for renewable energy projects. So these are large-scale wind and solar for projects in California and as well as Alameda County. We are planning to issue this request for proposal in the coming weeks, and hopefully to then bring forward a set of projects to contract with towards the sort of the middle to end of the year. I think two things that I did want to highlight in the structure of this. One, it's the emphasis on workforce development. So in the request for proposals, there are a set of workforce development criteria that were largely developed through the local development business plan process that are being included. They include things like mandatory prevailing wage requirements, preference for project labor agreements, and then for local projects, additional criteria around local hire. Obviously, if you're building a project in Stanislaus County or Kern County, you're not going to have a Alameda County hire requirement, just given the logistics there, and given the fact that in those communities, people need jobs as well, and so you want to make sure you're creating good jobs in those communities as well as in Alameda County. The other element here is a local development standard, so really setting a target for a minimum of 20 megawatts of Alameda County cited renewable energy. I think what's important to note here is our expectation is we'll get it, and it would be the largest local renewable project, new local renewable project, I believe, that a CCA will have contracted with. So Sonoma has contracted with the geysers. Those are existing resources. But in our county, part of that is a function of in San Mateo County, you can't build big solar and wind. Santa Clara County, you can't build big solar and wind. But 20 megawatts would be a really pretty significant commitment there. So
I'm sorry, I want to just, I'm super tired, but you said that in Kern County, you can't do local hire for Alameda County. So you're saying we would look to Kern County, correct?
So we would be looking
the project could come, the renewable energy could, but could we put in there that could we require PLAs and things like that?
So we've done some legal analysis, and the initial feedback we've gotten from council is because we don't own the project, we can't require it. We can state a preference for it. But because if East Bay Community Energy were to build something ourselves, we can require there must be a PLA. But because we're not going to own it, it will be owned by a third party. There are legal limitations as to sort of what you can require around a PLA. So you basically say we prefer it, and practically speaking, in California, all renewable energy projects are being built under PLAs.
So we could not pick them if it wasn't there, right?
Correct. So that's where the preference comes in as opposed to the requirement.
Okay. Anybody else?
There's just one other point. Part of the review process that we're suggesting is staff would form an ad hoc committee or subcommittee made up of a number of board members and CAC members to review confidential bids. So this would not be a Brown Act. This would be an ad hoc group that's formed, not a quorum.
Well, wait a minute. If you're going to will board members be voting on it?
Board members would be reviewing it, not voting on it. So staff would be making
I don't know that it's ever good that, at city councils, and, I shouldn't speak for city councils, but Board of Supervisors, we never sit on reviews of bids. So it's not a good practice.
That's great feedback. This is based on sort of what we've seen from other CCAs, because the price bid, we cannot, unlike maybe a bid for a building, these price bids are deemed confidential. So we can't share in a public setting well, solar company X bid $5 and solar company Y bid $7. That is market sensitive information. So we're trying to sort of put in place a mechanism whereby a subset of the board and CAC can actually participate in the review of confidential information. And then the staff would make a recommendation to the board to contract with project A, B, or C, but there's some subset of the members who've actually said, all right, we've been part of the review process and we understand why they're making the recommendation. So just wanted to say that that's something that we're working through, trying to sort of balance the confidentiality requirements with wanting to make sure that there's an opportunity to see the numbers.
Okay, so how many people did you want on that committee?
So right now, because this would be an ad hoc non-Brown Act, we would not be forming the committee now. It's something that we'll kind of, the staff would, or I would ask for volunteers for a handful of people. No more than, say, 5 total, made up between the CAC and the board.
Okay. Leave it at that for now. All right. Are you done on this one? You done?
Yep.
Anybody else? Bonacorsi, did you have a question?
Just a quick question in terms of, I understand the distinction between a preference and a requirement for a PLA, but if you're taking bids and you're asking the preference, do we have the discretion to take maybe a higher unit per cost because it's more responsive if that had a PLA component? Okay.
Yes.
Anybody else on this item? No speakers from the public. Board member comments?
I've got one.
Member DiGiovanacci?
Yes, I just wanted to thank Nick for coming out last week to the Alameda County Mayor's Conference and giving a presentation. I think you got some folks that were truly interested in and unaware of what was going on, so I think it was a good use of your time. So thanks again.
How did you do with Pleasanton and what was that other outlier? New Arc? What are they? What is that?
We did.
City call?
Yeah, I don't know. We did talk to. I did briefly talk to the mayor of Newark, and they said, "Well, you're going to save money." So there's an invitation there to go back and have a conversation.
I hear they're getting broadband pretty soon too. All right. All right. Is there any staff announcements?
There are none.
Oh, that's really perfect. See y'all June 20th. Somebody stole my gavel. I can't whack it. Warriors are getting their butt kicked.
Yes, in fact, let me introduce you to Eric and maybe get his card and Nick Sally if he's the right person. So if you come over there right now, we'll do that.
What? That's it? Easy day. What's up, kid? You look tired.
I got like 4 hours of sleep last night.
Yeah, I'm really exhausted too.
I had
Are you happy about your parking garage?